Hello, everyone. My name is Neil Kane. The title of my talk today is Anatomy of a Startup. And what I thought I would do is walk you through some of the steps of an actual company that I helped to build. First, a little bit of introduction. This is my background. I don't want to dwell on it, but I wanted to give you a quick understanding of what I've done so that you can understand my perspective. I'm an engineer by training. I have a lot of experience in sales. Notably at IBM and then later at Microsoft. But for pretty much the last 15 or so years of my career, I've specialized in taking complex innovations out of university research labs and commercializing them by forming startup companies. So I'm really the proverbial serial entrepreneur, if you will, but most of the work that I've done has been attached to universities in some fashion. I launched the Entrepreneurship Center at Argonne National Laboratory. I was the first entrepreneur in residence at the University of Illinois, so on and so forth. More recently, for pretty much the last 5 years, I've been working at Michigan State University, where I developed the undergraduate entrepreneurship program, and I now teach there. I've also recently co-authored a book, which I'll briefly mention later. All that to say, I have a very diverse background, a technical background, a sales background, and a lot of entrepreneurship experience. And so you'll see in a moment, the product that I'm going to talk about today has no real technology in it at all. Nonetheless, there's a lot of relevance to different companies that I've started. And there at the bottom is my LinkedIn address. I invite any of you to connect with me if you like. I'll repeat it again on the last slide. But if you have questions or want follow-up, I'll do my best to reply to you. I'm sure all of you recognize this as a Rubiks Cube. I'm just going to take that on faith. But the story that I'm about to tell you goes back to about the year 2014 when I met a 19-year-old undergraduate college student from Chicago. His name is Dane Christensen. I think he was a sophomore or junior mechanical engineering student at the time at the Illinois Institute of Technology. And as Dane likes to tell the story, as he was growing up as a kid, he was what's known as a cuber. That is somebody who was really into cubing, which is the term for people who like to play with Rubik's Cubes, and more generically, they're called twisty puzzles. And Dane is a really brilliant young man and had this incredible idea for basically hacking a Rubik's Cube. Now, if you're not in the market for these twisty puzzles, you may be surprised to learn that there are many, many different varieties. You can see those pyramidal shaped ones, and we now call a Rubik's Cube a 3x3x3 cube because that's a dimension. But you can see in the picture there's 4x4x4 and 5x5x5 and ones where the rows aren't even. And so there's a lot of these different sort of permutations. The two images at the bottom, though, are the beginnings of the prototype of a product that became the X Cube. This was Dane's invention, and basically, as he tells the story, what he did was he thought of a traditional Rubik's Cube, and then thought about putting this extra layer, I hope you can see that, this extra layer around the edges. So the product that we ultimately came out with, which you'll see more about in a moment, called the X Cube, you can probably imagine pretty well that there's kind of a 3x3x3 cube in the middle of it, but then there's this extra layer around the outside. And here's a picture of the final product, but what you can see in the upper right where Dane is holding the product is, unlike a Rubik's Cube, which changes colors but always stays in the cubic shape, the thing that was really cool about the X Cube the Rubik's Cube always stays in a cube, but the thing that's really cool about the X Cube is that it also changes shape. So it changes colors and changes shapes, and accordingly is infinitely more complex than a Rubik's Cube, at least in terms of the number of permutations. It doesn't necessarily automatically make it harder to solve, but it's different to solve. So if you know how to do a Rubik's Cube, it's pretty obvious that when you look at this, you have some sense of what it's about, but the way in which experienced cubers go about solving it is a little bit different. But back to Dane. So Dane had this sort of vision in his head as a young man for how to take apart a Rubiks Cube, hack it, add these extra layers. But it wasn't until he got to his university where he had access to 3D printers and other computer-aided design tools, and you can see an image of a 3D printer there, where he began to have a way to realize or manifest this vision that he had in his head. And like I showed you before, these two here are among the first prototypes that came off of the 3D printer at his university. But essentially, sometime in 2013, he was finally able to make a working prototype of the X Cube, again, off of the 3D printer at his university. And he started with a Rubiks Cube, which he took apart and hacked and added these extra parts. And then he created a video of himself solving the X Cube. There was no notion whatsoever at the time that this was going to become a company or any real idea of where this was going. It was just kind of a labor of love and a creative exercise for somebody who had both great mechanical aptitude and experience with Rubik's Cube. So Dane took this first prototype, solved it. I'll show you the video in a moment because it's kind of mind-blowing and the picture doesn't really do it justice. And he threw it out on YouTube, and I think it was picked up by Reddit and went to the top of one of the Reddit groups. And before long, as you can see there, he had 1.7 million views. This is on YouTube. And that's without any promotion, anything. It was just kind of picked up virally by the community of cubers, and it became very, very popular. And so suddenly he was getting calls or emails or overtures from people saying, wow, this is really cool. Where can I get it? Can I buy it? You really ought to make this available. And it wasn't until then that there was any notion or idea of actually starting a company. But this issue here of having this market signaling is really, really important and something that I talk to students about all the time. Now, had Dane decided initially, and this isn't how the story played out, that he was just going to start a company, you know, who knows what might have happened. But because there was this overwhelming exploration of an expression of interest from his target market, namely these cubers, that by the time he launched the company, there was a high degree of certainty or confidence that there was a market and the business was going to succeed. Most inexperienced entrepreneurs launch their products without really having that kind of clarity. So this was something that was really notable in this case. And then, and I'll show you a video in a moment, but through Dane's contacts at the Illinois Institute of Technology, he wound up getting a meeting with the head of Marbles, the Brain Store. Unfortunately, Marbles has since gone bankrupt. Tell you more about that in a moment. But for a period of time, they had 20, 30 stores, mostly throughout the Midwest and Northeast, where, as you could sort of tell by the name, they kind of sold puzzles and brain games and other kinds of things like that. So Dane went in and pitched, you know, the X Cube to the head of Marbles, and the guy at Marbles said, hey, we love the product. We'd be happy to carry it in our stores. It fits with our theme and makes a lot of sense for us. But can you get it manufactured? I mean, we need to, you know, we need to purchase a finished product. And Dane said, I don't know, can you help me? And so it was actually Marbles who initially connected Dane to a contract manufacturer in China, and then he was kind of off to the races. And I should add too that I had absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the evolution of the company up until this point. But now Dane had a design that people loved, as expressed through, you know, the 1.7 million views on YouTube. He had a potential customer, and now all he had to do was figure out how to get it into the market, into manufacturing, and make it. And another lesson that sometimes surprises young entrepreneurs is it takes money to make money. And despite the fact that Dane now had this great opportunity, it costs on the order of $35,000 or $40,000 just to be able to do that first manufacturing run through the contract manufacturer in China. For one, you have to pay for all the tooling. Those are the metal molds that are used in the injection molding process, but then you have to pay for the design, you have to pay for the safety checking, you have to pay for the package design, okay? And all of those are one-time costs before you ever start making anything. And I don't recall exactly how many X cubes were manufactured during that first run, probably on the order of 1,000 or so. But there was this big downstroke, this big capital outlay that was required, again, on the order of about $50,000 all in, just to be able to put the company in a position to be able to fulfill that very first order that they got from Marbles, the brain store. And I think I neglected to mention that in the middle of all of this, and with the expression of interest from Marbles, Dane wound up incorporating his company, got a lot of assistance, again, from the people in the entrepreneurship program at IIT. That's the Illinois Institute of Technology, where he went. Now I'm going to share a different screen on my computer, and I'm going to show you the Kickstarter video. So to raise this $50,000, and by the way, it's illustrative and important to know too, Dane actually borrowed money from his grandfather somewhere in the middle of all of this, just to have enough money to pay the lawyers and to get going. But by the time this new opportunity with Marbles came up, again, he needed on the order of about $50,000. And the way that he approached that was to launch a Kickstarter campaign. And if you're unfamiliar, Kickstarter is a way of basically pre-selling or crowdfunding a new product idea. You can see on the screen that he had a goal of raising $30,000. Kickstarters typically run for a period of a month. And then in this instance, people were able to pledge money, basically giving down payments on the purchase of an X cube. And the way Kickstarter works is that if that target goal, in this case $30,000, was met, then the money is released to the company, and the company in turn builds the product and then fulfills the obligation that it made to the backers. So I'm going to switch my screen and show you the Kickstarter video. It'll give you a taste of what the X cube looks like when Dane is solving it. It's really, really cool. It's maybe a little bit longer than it should be, so bear with me. It's only about 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes. And then Dane will talk in his own voice, and he'll give you kind of a first-person account of what he was trying to do with the Kickstarter video. So bear with me a moment. I have to switch screens here. All right, and this video is still up. I can put the link in the chat box if anybody's curious, but it's available on Kickstarter.com, and if you search for the X Cube, you'll find it. But here goes.
Hello Kickstarter, my name is Dane Christensen. I just finished my second year studying mechanical engineering here at the Illinois Institute of Technology. Here we are at the university's Idea Shop, a prototyping lab where people can bring their ideas to life. Here at the Idea Shop, we have a 3D printer. This is the very 3D printer I use to make this X Cube. This turned out to be a pretty exciting puzzle, so I wanted to put it on the market. I approached Marbles the Brain Store, a chain based here in Chicago that sells all sorts of brain games. They said they'd love to carry the X Cube in their stores, and even connected me with a manufacturer. Your support on Kickstarter will pay for injection molding, assembly, and packaging so the X Cube can make it into the hands of people everywhere. The X Cube proved to be a great application of 3D printing. I decided to make it open source. This way, the puzzle can reach a much wider audience while promoting 3D printing technology. Pledge what you want to support the Kickstarter, and you get to download the files to 3D print the X Cube. The X Cube is one puzzle you can't just take the stickers off of. Instead, if you get stuck, just take it apart and try again. Thank you for watching, and good luck.
So that's the X Cube. As you can see, really, really cool, ingenious, creative puzzle. But just having a good product or even one that's in demand doesn't guarantee that you're going to have a good business. You also need a good business model. And that's really the contribution that I made to the company. A little bit after Dane raised the money on Kickstarter, got set up with a manufacturer in China, and started having some initial sales at Marbles. Oh, I apologize. There we go. He was really kind of off to the races. And I first met him in late 2013 when, again, he was a full-time student, also trying to manage his business. And around that time, I was looking for something to do. As you may have gathered by now, I'm kind of the experienced, gray hair in the room. And I saw what Dane was doing, but I also saw that it was enormously stressful, but perhaps in a good way. And I was looking for my next gig, so to speak. And I said, hey, Dane, can I help you? And he just about, fell into my arms because he had this huge opportunity in front of him and really, really, really needed some assistance. So we became partners. I wasn't literally a co-founder of the company because, as you can see, it began a little bit before I showed up. But together, we really turned it into something wonderful. So this was the product. I showed it to you here. It's available today still on Amazon. If anybody's interested, just go search on X Cube on Amazon and you'll find it. So I want to show you a couple of pictures here to show you kind of some of the chaos and some of what we were dealing with at the time. This initial run in December of 2013, I say initial run, by that I mean inventory run. You can see all of the products in those cardboard corrugated boxes up at the top that were shipped to Dane's house, basically, by the manufacturer in China, and what it looked like as they were trying to ship some of them out. It was a very manual process, not very scalable. Nonetheless, this is wholly appropriate for the way a lot of businesses get off the ground. I love this image, which actually was taken in Dane's basement, of the very same inventory run that came from this first manufacturer in China. So in early 2014, Dane and one of our other investors walked the floor of the show. Every year in February at the Javits Center in New York City is an international toy show. That's where all the toy manufacturers are there exhibiting their products. Buyers from retailers and online companies from around the world all come. So Dane walked the floor of the show at that time. We didn't exhibit there until the following year, but he was just using this time as a way of sort of, learning. Additionally, he also got a spot on the Steve Harvey Show. I don't know that I can show it on here. It's available on YouTube, but it's copyright material, so I'm not sure that it's cool for me to rebroadcast it here. But if you go to YouTube and Google Steve Harvey Show and Dane Christensen or the X Cube, you'll find a really, really nice spot with Dane, you know, doing that thing, and Steve Harvey, if you've ever seen him, sort of, you know, mocking for the camera and sounding like he's ignorant and so on and so forth. Anyway, this was about the time when I showed up. Again, this was mostly in between Dane's semester break as we entered into 2014. So as I came into the picture, a couple things had to happen. First of all, we ran out of money. Okay, despite the infusion of cash that had come from the Kickstarter, the great majority of that money went to not only pay off the manufacturer in China, but you know, we had an obligation to ship out a lot of the product. Much of the, you know, the product was already paid for by the Kickstarter backers. So, you know, we had a little bit of money left over in terms of our profit, but again, we were out of inventory. And ordering an inventory run from China is really a big deal, because you have to pay for the entirety of the run, probably 6 months, in some cases 9 months, before you actually convert that into cash yourself. So growing companies consume cash, and they spend money long before they start making money. This is another one of the lessons that I teach a lot in my university classes. So by the time 2015 came around, we were in great shape in the sense that the business was starting to grow. I brought to the company a vision for how we should set up our distribution and our sales network so that we could be selling, you know, these products basically all over the country very effectively. It was pretty clear to both of us at the time, even though we started selling on Amazon, you know, back then, Toys R Us, Barnes & Noble, specialty toy shops all over the country were the kind of retail establishment where you might go to get this. So the question that we had to ask ourselves was, how does a, you know, two-person company in Chicago get that reach to be calling on all of these businesses all over the country? And we did that by setting up a network of manufacturers reps. But again, we needed money. And so with my assistance, we were able to get a loan from essentially the Chamber of Commerce. That didn't last us long, but it was enough to get us a little bit farther down the road. And then finally, the big sort of inflection point for us was when we got our first order from Barnes & Noble, because that was a huge order. We wound up in about 900 or so Barnes & Noble storefronts around the country, but it required a lot of money. And so probably the most significant contribution I was able to make to the business was through a relationship that I had with a banker who had financed me in an earlier company. We were able to get a commercial loan. We borrowed about $120,000 in order to primarily finance this inventory run. The other thing that we had to do was deal with switching manufacturers. So this was a whole nother huge episode of frustration, but it turns out that that first manufacturer that Dane had been ordering from in China, their quality was a little bit spotty, but the cost was really high. And so we made the decision that by reabsorbing all of the costs again of paying for tooling, in other words, making some redesigns, redoing all the tooling and going to another manufacturer, we were able to lower our cost of goods significantly. So that was a big gamble. It took money, but we made it back some months later in the form of much larger gross margins. So that was really cool, but it was a huge headache for us at the time. So the lesson here is that even if your business is growing, you can still run out of money if you aren't managing yourself very well. I want to show you a couple of really cool slides. We did a couple of different trade shows at the time. This is sort of what the exhibit looked like. I think this one was in Las Vegas, where we had a little bit more room than we did in New York. But I love the image on the left where you can just see how engaged people were, and kids and parents and everybody else. For those of you who are perceptive, you may notice that there are a couple of other products sitting on the table. We came out with this second product around that time called the Boob Cube, which was really meant to be a novelty. As you can tell, it just twists only in one dimension. So we thought of this as kind of a stocking stuffer, or something that, you know, somebody might give somebody else as sort of a practical joke, or, you know, a little bit of a needling kind of a thing. So you can see some of the Boob Cubes there on our table as well. Somewhat later, and I'm going a little bit out of sequence, we came out with our third product, which we call the X2, which adds yet another layer here. When we were in New York City in February 2015 for that first toy show, yet another toy company that has since gone out of business was FAO Schwarz. Some of you may know they were like the most famous toy retailer in the world. They had this big flagship store on Fifth Avenue, I think where the Apple store now is, or thereabouts. But anyway, they were still in business back in 2015. And so when Dane and I were in New York for the toy show in February of that year, we knew that the X Cube was being sold inside the Marbles pop-up store, which was inside FAO Schwarz, which was this huge retailer on Fifth Avenue. So we went over there one evening and basically had Dane go incognito. He didn't reveal his identity to the salesperson, but in the image in the upper right, that's Dane, you know, asking the sales guy a bunch of questions and sounding like a dork, and basically, you know, fooling this guy. And, you know, if you had been there in the moment, you know, the sales guy is saying how difficult it is and nobody's able to solve it. And then Dane just goes, you know, and kind of solves the puzzle. So it was a really clever moment. But once he revealed himself, all of the salespeople in the store were all excited about having this inventor there. And so the image on the left is when Dane started basically giving tutorials to everybody who was in the store, and a whole group of parents and kids started congregating around us, so much so that as people were buying X Cubes, Dane started autographing them. So it was a really, really fun moment, and we had some really cool stuff going on at the time. I mentioned the Boob Cube. We also had spent a lot of time and money on the products that you see at the bottom, which were wooden puzzles, kind of a combination of dominoes and Sudoku. But that product never made it to market. And so despite the fact that we were unequivocally a successful company and profitable, not everything that we did worked out. And that's an example of one that didn't. I want to try to share some of the lessons that we learned and recap the story a little bit. So despite the fact that, you know, the company really took off very quickly and got into the market and overcame a lot of the initial challenges that most companies struggle with, we still needed money. And, you know, as I mentioned, Dane was 19, 20 years old at the time, had no assets to speak of, no credit history of his own. This wasn't the kind of business that was going to lend itself to raising venture capital or anything like that. And so, you know, there was a need for money. And so Dane got started by borrowing money from his grandfather. Later, we got this Chamber of Commerce loan, and then finally a commercial bank loan. And we were able to pay all of those back with interest somewhat later. So the capital was essential for us to you know, have it for a period of time until we became profitable. Some of the other challenges that almost put us out of business, I mentioned that we switched manufacturers. That was a huge, huge issue. Somewhere around 2016 or so, it became very clear that to really be successful, we needed to be selling on Amazon. And even though we did well with Amazon, and you can certainly make money with Amazon, it's not quite as simple as, you know, just put it out there and forget it. For those of you unfamiliar with the way Amazon works, there's basically two ways that you can sell to Amazon. One is by selling your product to Amazon, kind of like what we did with Barnes & Noble. Amazon, in turn, owns the inventory. They fix the price. They handle everything. Okay. But they're basically paying you wholesale for whatever your value of your product is. The other way to sell on Amazon, and the reason why there's millions and millions and millions of products available on Amazon, is through something called FBA, or Fulfillment by Amazon, where the manufacturer continues to own the product, sets the price and terms, and then you're just paying Amazon basically as a warehouse and logistics service provider. So that's how we got on Amazon. The good news is if your product is doing well, you can make a lot more money that way. The bad news is that you have much more of a need for cash, and there is a real art to selling successfully through Amazon. It takes effort and time. So we had to manage that. We have a registered trademark on the word X Cube, and you know, we don't have any trademark issues with the Rubiks Cube people, which is fortunate, but we did have people who were ripping off the X Cube, so we had to deal with policing them. As I mentioned, we came out with a couple of new products. Some, like the Boob Cube, did pretty well. Those wooden products never actually reached the market. And then in the, you know, in the universe of kind of like Murphy's Law, or you never know what's going to happen, the biggest thing that came the closest to putting us out of business was in late 2015, and again, this was after Dane, or 2014, I apologize, late 2014, after Dane had some of these initial successes with getting into marbles, and we were, and Marbles is a Chicago-based store, so we were basically delivering the product directly to them. But as we set up this network of manufacturers reps, and we started to get orders from all over the country, we had to make a decision in probably about August or so of 2014, what we thought the demand was going to be and how much product we wanted to have in our hands by, let's say, early November, in order to then be able to turn that stuff around, ship it out to stores, so it would be in all of the retail stores, certainly no later than Thanksgiving, right? But probably around the middle of November is kind of when that whole holiday season really starts. So, you know, we did our best. It was a highly uncertain initiative because we didn't have much of a sales history. We didn't know how many stores we were going to be in. We placed our order, and to make a very, very, very long story short, I don't know if it was the Teamsters or the Longshoremen or some, you know, union wound up striking at the Port of Long Beach that December as a way of exerting their leverage over whatever it was their grievance was. And so basically our product, which we had fully paid for, which we wanted to have in stores by Christmas, sat on a boat in Long Beach Harbor and wasn't delivered to us until the first week of January. So we completely missed our entire holiday season, which meant that we had customers that were disappointed. It meant that, you know, we had a profit opportunity that we completely missed out on. And then we still own the inventory. So we took receipt of it in like January after the holiday season was over. And I don't think we completely sold all of it probably until about June. So that created another cash flow problem for us because we had paid for all of it, but it took us at least 6 months longer to convert that into cash and to get our profit from it than we had anticipated. So we had some near-death experiences, but you know, that's what makes this kind of fun. Rolling forward, we decided, and I made reference to this earlier, that we needed to switch manufacturers. We had quality issues that we wanted to attend to, but we were also keen to lower our costs, and we decided that the best way to do it responsibly was to have Dane go to China so that he could actually observe what was being done and he could inspect the product as it was coming off the manufacturing line before it was shipped to us in Chicago. One of the problems that we had earlier was, you know, the manufacturer was representing to us that the product met our spec. They were putting it on a boat to Chicago, but if there was any problem along the way, you know, we were stuck paying for it. The product was in Chicago before we even knew that we had a problem. It's not a very good way to do business. Big companies, of course, have representatives over there, or they hire consultants. but as a tiny business, we were kind of at the mercy of the integrity and the quality and the experience of our manufacturer. So the second time we did this, we said, Dane's got to go over there. So he actually spent a couple months in China working through redesigns and basically hanging out like a student, waiting, to have all of this stuff debugged. And then, as I mentioned, finally in 2015, remember we met Barnes & Noble in February of 2015. So it took us almost, the entire year, certainly 8 to 10 months to go from getting that order from Barnes & Noble to getting stuff in their warehouse, which we successfully did by November. We threaded the needle on the holiday season in 2015, and we had a really, really, really great season. And that continued into 2016. I showed you this before. We came out with a second product called the X2. And I'll just show you this very, very briefly to give you an idea of what our business model was. Because it's one thing for me to stand up here and talk about really cool products, but to really kind of develop some intuition of what was going on behind the scenes, I wanted to share this with you. The retail price for our product at the time, for the X Cube, it's since come down in price quite a bit, but the retail price back then was $32. And what you see in the top row there is our selling price to Barnes & Noble was $16. They were doubling its price and selling it for $32. It cost us $7.40 to have one of these manufactured in China. It cost $5, plus we had to pay a commission to our brokerage firm. So $7.40 was our cost of goods. We were selling it to Barnes & Noble for $16. So our profit was the $8.60 that you see there. That's a 54% gross margin, which is pretty good. And then Barnes & Noble in turn sold it for $32. You may be interested to know that the product that you paid $32 for at Barnes & Noble really only cost $5 or less when it was manufactured in China. When we moved to Amazon, and this is why Amazon is so powerful, although the numbers have changed a little bit over time, so replicating this would be a little bit harder to do today. But for the same retail price, the same $32, the fees that we were paying to Amazon were only about $11 versus, as you can see, $16 in the Barnes & Noble case. So we were capturing, that extra $5, plus we didn't have to pay any brokerage fees. So our profit on the same product when we sold through Amazon was almost twice. Went from $8.60 to $16 selling through Amazon as opposed to Barnes & Noble. So this is why, people love selling through Amazon, but Amazon, has a lot of control over its vendors, or sellers, I should say. And in particular, if your product is not moving quickly, then the fees that Amazon charges you just keep ratcheting up because you're basically paying them by the month regardless of what happens. So what I'm presenting to you here is kind of a best case scenario, but it is approximately close to what we experienced for a period of time. Let me summarize kind of the lessons learned, and then I'll tell you very briefly what happened in the company following that, and then we'll wrap up. So one of the lessons that we learned is it really helps to have a great product, right? I mean, when I first met Dane, I was just, blown away by the elegance and the brilliance of what it took to create this. And the fact that even, without infringing on any Rubiks trademarks or doing anything appropriate, somebody would walk in a store and know exactly what this product was really key to our success. In other words, we had a brand that didn't require investing in. So we were instantly profitable, which was really great. I mentioned this many times, you need capital to grow, and this is probably one of the most counterintuitive lessons for young entrepreneurs to understand, especially if you have a product-based business. If you have a service-based business, it's a little bit of a different story. Kickstarter alone won't get you there, but a good business model is really key. I've consulted with and seen a lot of other companies who have raised money on Kickstarter, but for a variety of reasons, they just didn't manage that correctly and wound up failing despite having a successful Kickstarter. We learned some tough lessons about quality control, especially, trying to get something manufactured like 7,000 miles away. And we outsourced just about everything in the business. We eventually hired a part-time bookkeeper who we also engaged on an outsourced basis. But, Dane and I together, built up this business because the manufacturing was outsourced, the marketing was outsourced, the sales was outsourced. We focused on what we did well, which was owning this design and protecting the trademark. In the long run, though, basically the final chapter of the story is, number one, it's very, very, very difficult to sustain yourself if you're basically a one product company. And so yes, we had the X Cube, and then we kind of came out with the Boob Cube, and we had this one too, but they're all, basically just extensions of the same product. We were never successful in replicating the success of the X Cube. And it's very, very difficult to sustain yourself if you just have one source of revenue. So that was a problem. Plus, as I'm sure all of you know, retail changed enormously in like 2017, 2018, right? Marbles, our largest customer, went out of business. They actually owed us money, which we didn't get paid on at the time that they went bankrupt. We never sold into Toys R Us, but they went out of business. Amazon just basically kept, swallowing up the entire retail channel. And then around that same time, I got this opportunity to go work at Michigan State University. And that was just too good to pass up, even though at the time that I joined Dane in the company, I figured, I would just do this for the rest of my career. As long as we were profitable and I could make an income from it, that's exactly what I wanted to do. But the opportunity to join the university came up, and so I took it, and I was more than willing to coach and mentor Dane and teach him how to run the business and create a legacy for himself, but he didn't want to do that. He had another idea in mind. He's since started a new business of his own that's in a completely separate field, and he just kind of wanted to move on as well. So what we wound up doing, we thought about selling the company, but ultimately what we wound up doing was licensing these products and our design and our intellectual property to another company. So as I mentioned, the products are available today. You can order them on Amazon, but they're actually manufactured, distributed, shipped, and everything from another company. They own our trademarks under license, and they pay us a royalty as they make sales. And this was our way, hopefully, of Dane and I each, having different jobs, but continuing to, hopefully, doesn't always happen, make a residual income from the time and money that we invested in building up the X Cube, and also, keep that alive for a period of time. If we sold the business, we might get some payoff, but then our, the source of income for us would be cut off. So it remains our hope, and trust me, there's no free lunch, and none of this is easy, even though it's very seductive to talk about licensing something, believing that your mailbox is just going to fill up with checks from time to time, but it doesn't exactly happen that way. Anyway, that's where we are today. I work for the university. Dane's onto something else. The product is in the hands of a third party who continues to market it under our trademark. And that's our story. I hope you found it illuminating and interesting, and I thank you very much for your attention. To just wind up, shameless plug, I also recently co-authored a book called The Innovator's Secret Formula. You can learn more about it at that link there. And then I promised you that I would share my contact information. Again, there's my email address, my LinkedIn profile. And I've written a lot over the years on many topics related to small businesses and venture capital and startups and the like. And you can see everything that I've written is available on my blog, and the link there is below. Thank you very much.